Allison Morris watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
He gave up and did not resist, and our folks were able to take him into custody without incident.
Surrender. After an hours-long standoff, a truck driver claiming to have explosives near the nation's capital turns himself in. Hurricane Grace slamming into Mexico. Tropical storm Henri gaining strength and taking aim at the northeast. The flooding from Fred turning deadly in North Carolina. We're tracking all the dangerous weather across North America.
We're looking to fill 100 driver positions right now.
And at your last job fair, how many people showed up?
We had 16 show up at our last job. 16.
And the wheels on the bus aren't going round and round as they should. The struggle to find more bus drivers as the new school year begins. We start with breaking news at the Capitol. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams is in Washington, D.C., covering the bomb threat there. Pete, the Capitol Police Chief briefed the public. Here's part of what he said.
We had information and evidence of what was in the bed of his truck, and there were some things that were concerning, but ultimately we were able to take him in custody without incident. But there were certain things that we saw in the truck. For instance, a propane gas. Obviously, that was not at this point. We think that's safe.
Pete, the man in that truck surrendered to police this afternoon. What can you tell us about him?
Well, his name is Floyd Ray Roseberry. He's from Grover, North Carolina, and he drove his pickup truck up here to Washington, and about 9:15 this morning, parked it on the sidewalk in front of the Library of Congress, apparently in an effort to get attention. And then he himself called 911 and said there was a pickup truck parked on the sidewalk. So he clearly wanted to get the attention of authorities and get some attention focused on his message here, because after telling police that he had a bomb in the vehicle, he then began to live stream from the cab of the pickup on Facebook. This went on quite a long time before Facebook finally cut the stream off. Now, you're jumping ahead with this picture here now, so I'll jump ahead, too, and just say that after 5 hours of this...
Keep going, Pete, yep.
They sent in a robot with a phone, but he never picked it up, so he just got out of the truck and crawled away, apparently feeling that he had gotten his message across. Now, during the time he was on Facebook, he had a long string of anti-government rhetoric. He had complained about not being able to get adequate health care for himself or his wife. He complained about immigration policies. But you can see he had this thing in his hand for a good deal of the time that he was in the bed of the pickup, and then he eventually sets it down and crawls away. And he had said that he had a bomb, but they were never able to confirm that he did. But during the Facebook stream, you could see this thing that was in his lap, some sort of a metal can with a lump of clay, what looked like a lump of clay on top, and then on that a little box with a blue button on top of it. So he clearly wanted to make it look like it was an explosive device. Yeah. And, of course, it set off, as you would imagine, an enormous response here. Federal buildings all throughout the area were shut down. People were evacuated from them. This is about a block from the U.S. Capitol on First Street, which is the street between the Capitol and the Supreme Court and the Library of Congress. So you've got the Supreme Court around it. You've got congressional office buildings and the Library of Congress buildings themselves, all of them evacuated. The Washington, D.C. Metro was stations nearby were closed down, so the train simply bypassed them. So it was a huge response, and you can understand why. Number one, this is a city still on high alert after the Capitol riots, and there's still continuing social media threats about attacking Washington. And then, of course, just somebody with a pickup truck claiming they have a bomb, that's going to set off an enormous reaction, too. So the question is, did he have an actual viable explosive device? The final results of that aren't in, but the early indications we're getting is that he did not.
Pete, a quick question for you, because throughout the day as we were following this standoff, people were making note of this dry erase board that he had with him. What do we know about that? What was going on with that?
Well, so while he's on Facebook, the police are eager to talk to him, but he did not talk to them, we're told. He had a dry erase board, you know, one of those white plastic boards that you write on with a special pen, and then you can wipe the ink off and start all over again. And that's how he exchanged messages initially with the police on this dry erase board. And that's why they sent the phone in on a robot, but he never used it.
All right, Pete, it was quite a day in Washington, D.C., but glad to hear that he surrendered and seemed to do so without any trouble. Thank you for your reporting today.
You bet.
More than 2,000 people flown out of Afghanistan in the last 24 hours, 300 of them Americans, according to the Pentagon. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubey has the latest on those evacuations.
Allison, Pentagon officials now saying that the evacuation effort in Kabul is really ramping up. We heard from Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, on Wednesday, who said that the effort was going to hopefully build up to about 20 flights a day, nearly one an hour, and the capacity of anywhere between 5,000 to 9,000 people being moved out of that country every single day. Well, in the past 24 hours, according to the Pentagon, about 2,000 people have been moved out. They've also had 13 C-17s that have been flown into the country and 12 that have left with individuals. But what's become clear is that while there doesn't seem to be an issue with getting the aircraft in and out of the country, it's really there's still a bottleneck of getting people onto those planes to leave. And where that really starts is with these Taliban checkpoints. They are set up around the airport, and both Americans and particularly Afghans are having a difficult time getting through them. Once they even get through the checkpoints, then they have a tough time getting through the gates into the airport. Then they need to come inside and they need to get manifested on one of these flights. So there are several steps. It's very clear that it is holding up the process for some people to leave. The U.S. military is in technical talks, basically, with the Taliban about safe passage for Americans. But at this point, there still is no agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban to allow Afghans to come through. Now, as I mentioned, about 2,000 people got out in the past 24 hours on some of these evacuation flights. But the truth is, the numbers are kind of confusing. And we heard a little bit more about why that is from General Hank Taylor of the Joint Staff. Here's what he had to say.
It's not about the math. It's about what's ready to fly. You know, who's on the airfield ready to leave a holding area and get on the aircraft. And as those numbers increase, which you've seen they have in the last 24, 48, the CENTCOM command team will continue to bring in the airflow required to fly out those people.
General Taylor explaining that they do have the aircraft available for these airlifts. They just need more Afghans to come in and Americans be processed to be able to put them in the seats. Another interesting admission that we got out of the Pentagon today is that they now have armed F-18 fighter jets flying over Kabul. They're calling it an enhanced security mission. But what's clear is this is the U.S. military's not only showing that they have this capability, we know that they have it, but by putting these aircraft over Kabul, they're showing that they not only have the ability to conduct airstrikes, but they're willing to do it, that they are able to do it at a very short notice, Allison.
President Biden meeting with his national security team to assess the situation in Afghanistan, still defending his decision to withdraw in an interview with ABC News.
You don't think this could have been handled, this actually could have been handled better in any way? No mistakes?
No, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba's on the North Lawn. Monica, the president saying he doesn't think Afghanistan could have been handled any differently. But 51% of registered voters disapprove of how he managed the situation, according to a new Morning Consult Politico poll. What else did the president say about the U.S. troop withdrawal and the chaos that we've been seeing in Afghanistan this week?
Overall, Allison, the president and the White House saying, both of them and the administration in total, that they have no regrets about this decision, though, of course, that polling you presented there will pose additional questions. They themselves are pointing to some polling that shows that about 2/3 of Americans still believe that the war in Afghanistan was not one that was worth fighting any longer. So they're going to continue to beat that drum. But we did learn more from the president's interview with ABC, in which he was asked if former President Trump had not negotiated that deal with the Taliban to withdraw troops by the 1st of May of this year, what would he have done differently? And the president said he would have still tried to get a drawdown out probably in this time frame. So the president standing quite firm on that. He was also asked again about the Afghan women and girls, of course, so concerned about what their lives are going to look like now that the Taliban has taken over the country. And the president said if he can, he would like to get them out, as many as possible. Of course, we know just from Courtney's reporting just there and what we heard from the State Department earlier this afternoon, that is still a big challenge because the Taliban is controlling those checkpoints, though the United States government says they're trying to do everything they can, and they're still working with the Taliban to allow for Americans and approved Afghan nationals to get through them so that then they can board planes at Kabul International Airport and come to the United States. Allison.
Monica, a lot of people trying to get a handle on what the real clear plan is right now. What is the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan?
We've learned more from the president throughout this interview in terms of how he views this. And again, he's defending what they did, saying that chaos was something that was essentially not going to be avoided. Of course, that did present a lot more questions about, well, if you knew those were the contingencies, could they have better prepared, for instance? But the president was also pressed repeatedly on whether his military advisors warned him about this. And he said that there was a split among them when he did talk to them before making this decision, and that there wasn't an instance where they warned of this level of chaos ensuing, at least that he could recall. But here's a little bit more from that exchange with George Stephanopoulos.
All troops are supposed to be out by August 31st. Even if Americans and our Afghan allies are still trying to get out, they're going to leave?
We're going to do everything in our power to get all Americans out and our allies out.
Does that mean troops will stay beyond August 31st if necessary?
It depends on where we are and whether we can ramp these numbers up to 5,000 to 7,000 a day coming out. If that's the case, they'll all be out.
This is something that just logistically the Pentagon and State Department have been asked about all week long, about how this would work if it does go beyond August 31st. Though you heard the president there saying that he was committed to getting everybody out, even if that did extend beyond then. The question is, do our deals or do certain things that we had in place on the ground expire then? Does the situation shift dramatically? All of those questions remain unanswered, Allison. So that is one of the absolute major challenges for this White House. But that was a big, big pressure point, because earlier in the week when all of this was happening, they couldn't commit to keeping and helping people beyond August 31st. Now the president there saying declaratively that is the plan.
Monica, the president also talked about how the crisis in Afghanistan is affecting the U.S. relationship with its allies. What did he say there?
Specifically, he talked about all of these meetings he had with world leaders in the month of June, right around when he was making all of these decisions. Of course, he announced the initial drawdown back in April, but we didn't learn about the exact way it would all work until July. So the president said he talked to NATO allies, he sat down with them, they went through the specifics, and in his words, they agreed, quote, we need to get out. So that's something the president is saying. He was steadfast in his partnership with other countries, even though, of course, we've seen them express some concerns about the way in which this evacuation took place.
Yeah. All right, Monica Alba at the White House, thank you.
Every time I see my little son or talk to him, his question is, Dad, when am I coming home?
A family here in the U.S. desperately trying to get their soon-to-be adopted son out of Afghanistan. They're just one of countless other families trying to bring their loved ones home. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson has their stories.
This is desperation, a baby passed forward at Kabul airport as Afghans of all ages try to escape the Taliban. In Florida, this bedroom waits for 10-year-old Noman.
We are feeling anxiety because we've been let down so many times.
The room is the culmination of Bahauddin Mushtaba's 5-year odyssey to adopt his distant relative from Afghanistan.
We're about 90% done. I'm hoping that during the next few days to the next week, we can get some sort of visa for him to come to the United States.
It is difficult. The State Department says only 41 Afghan children were adopted by U.S. families over a 20-year period.
What makes it so difficult for Americans to adopt Afghan children? So it's a combination of the fact that Afghanistan prefers adopting parents who are originally from Afghanistan, who are practicing Muslims.
Mujtaba says his paperwork is in order and he is anxious to bring home Noman, who loves music and soccer and wants to be an engineer or doctor.
He's very excited about it. He's looking forward to it. It's heart-wrenching, obviously, for me not to be able to give him a definitive date in terms of when he can come to the U.S.
Zora Aziz's husband is also trying to get out. She says he spent the past few days going back and forth to the airport, but going nowhere yet.
There's really no guidance. He just told me that he is hopping over cars trying to get to the plane, trying to get to an American to help him.
For Bushra, her husband and child, success.
I just arrived in America.
She made bracelets in Afghanistan sold by TAPS, an American organization that supports families of fallen service members. Her husband worked for the U.S. government. TAPS, with help from the State Department, got the family on a commercial flight out of the country.
I want to take this moment and thank American people and Afghan people who have lost their lives, and I want to honor both of them.
Ann Thompson joins me now. Ann, I know the situation is changing hour by hour, minute by minute. Any updates from the families that you spoke with?
Allison, how about some good news? Mujtaba tells NBC News that Noman, the boy he hopes to adopt, that he plans to adopt, made it to Kabul airport with another family. They have not heard from him. Mujtaba says he has not heard from him for several hours. He doesn't know if the cell phones have gone dead or they've gotten on a plane, but they do know at long last, after several harrowing attempts, they finally made it to the airport. So that's some good news.
Well, that is wonderful, Anna. Let's hope the good news keeps on coming. Maybe they're on a flight or about to be on one. That would be wonderful. President Biden saying that he won't leave any Americans behind. But what are you hearing from these families? Are they confident that that includes their loved ones?
Well, their loved ones are not Americans, so they are Afghan nationals. And so this is more difficult. There is a tremendous effort to get the Afghans who helped the American forces there for 20 years out of the country. The fear is that some will be left behind. I mean, this is a situation that truly is changing hour by hour. And you heard today from the Pentagon that on the military side of Kabul airport, the flights are now coming in and out and operating at a fairly regular clip. They've gotten, I think, they got 2,000 people out over the last 24 hours. They hope to get as many as 5,000 to 9,000 people out a day. So they've clearly got a ways to go to ramp up the program. But there is at least a sense of a little more hope today than perhaps yesterday or the day before.
Well, Ann, thank you so much for bringing us a bit of good news in a situation that hasn't seemed to have so much lately. We appreciate it. It's my favorite time of the hour. Time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Bush. She's got the headlines for us from NBCNews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. All right, we are going to start with the escalating violence in Cameroon. The UN Refugee Agency says that clashes between herders and fishermen have killed at least 32 people this month, and 19 villages have been torched. Nearly 11,000 people fled to nearby Chad, and more than 7,000 have been displaced since the fighting broke out on August 10th. Officials calling it the country's worst ethnic violence in years. And a major policy change from the federal government on police body camera footage. So according to memos obtained by NBC News, the Department of Justice has agreed to allow local police assigned to federal fugitive task forces to release body camera footage to the public after police-involved shootings. Now, those task forces, led by the U.S. Marshals Service, target people who are wanted on arrest warrants. The move comes amid calls for greater transparency from federal authorities. And proposed fines for unruly airline passengers this year have topped $1 million. That massive total coming after the FAA announced $500,000 in new fines against 34 passengers accused of that unruly behavior. Since January, federal authorities have reported nearly 3,900 incidents, with the majority of cases involving passengers who refuse to comply with the federal mask mandates. And the newly named Jeopardy host, Mike Richards, is actually apologizing for sexist comments he made years ago on a podcast. Richards, who hosted the Random Show from 2013 to 2014, said in a statement, quote, "It's more than clear that my attempts to be funny and provocative were not acceptable. The episodes, which were reportedly laden with sexist comments about women's bodies and clothing, have been pulled." NBC News has not listened to those original recordings. And vegan Chipotle fans, get excited. The fast casual chain is announcing that it's testing a meatless chorizo option in Indianapolis and Denver. The plant-based chorizo will use pea protein and is also made without grains, gluten, or soy. Chipotle actually offered regular chorizo as an option in 2016, but eventually pulled the item. If this plant-based version is a success, hopefully the tofu-based sofritas will be feeling a little less alone on the Chipotle assembly line. Allison?
Gotta give the tofu some company. Don't leave it hanging there all alone. Jeez.
Come on.
Thanks, Simone. At least 2 people are dead, 20 more missing in North Carolina. Tropical Depression Fred flooding the western part of that state, and more bad weather could be on the way. NBC News correspondent Katie Beck is in Clyde, North Carolina.
Well, Allison, several communities in western North Carolina now in recovery mode after catastrophic flooding as a result of Tropical Storm Fred. As you mentioned, we know about several fatalities and several people still missing that search crews are actively looking for. At this time, they've got boats on the water, they've got boots on the ground, and they are looking from the sky as well to try and locate any possible survivors in some small towns here in the area. We also know that schools have been closed today and tomorrow. Some of those schools using their space as shelter for people that lost their homes in these floods. Homeowners say the flash flooding came fast and furious. Here's a description from one.
It happened in a matter of about 45 minutes. The water went from just a normal flood to where it was 4 feet on the side of the house.
Well, for now, the waters have receded and the weather is cooperating for search and rescue efforts throughout today. But officials say they do have concerns in coming days moving forward. There is a significant amount of rain in the forecast, and they are concerned about how that could impact their efforts.
Extreme weather slamming both sides of the country this week. Tropical Depression Fred, I'm having trouble saying that one today, flooding the East Coast, with Henri now expected to become a hurricane on its way. On the West Coast, the Caldor fire forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate their homes in Northern California. NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here now. Michelle, I think I'm struggling to say Fred because I have such a hard time with such a friendly name causing so many problems for people. But that's not the only issue, right? Between the hurricanes, the fires, we got a whole lot going on. So I'll let you pick which coast you want to start with and just give us the latest updates, please.
You're so cute. Hi there, Allison. I know I have trouble with Fred too. And then there's Linda also in the Pacific. So that's really a friendly name too. But let's go ahead and start with the fires because we are looking at extensive. I know, Linda. All right, let's start with this wildfires because we are looking at just extreme damage, extreme conditions there. West Coast to East Coast and then in between also. So the wildfires, still hundreds of fires burning. We red flag warnings because we have the combination of those gusty winds up to 40 miles per hour. Also low humidity, those drought conditions, really strong winds flaming those fires. So another tough day. And we have several months to go before that official wildfire season does end. The smoke forecast, it's a tough one. It's miserable from San Francisco, even down to Los Angeles. You can see that huge swath of smoke causing all those issues with air respiration. And so we're going to see that a problem again today. Let's talk about Fred. We were talking about him earlier, but you know, I'm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I can tell you we had a tornado warning at 12:30 this morning. And we had some really heavy rain, that tropical tropical moisture came here as well, but this is the last hurrah for Fred. You can even see in this last image here, the rain not quite as heavy. We saw those yellows and reds in the beginning, but then sort of weakening as we go through that last frame. That's good news. So it's going to take an exit later on tonight, but still bringing some rain to the northeast parts of New England. And we do have some flash flood warnings still in place, less than before, even less than an hour ago. So that's good news. But Utica, Cortland, you're seeing those flash flood warnings, and we could see 1 to 2 inches of additional rain, and then it finally says goodbye later on tonight. Now, all the eyes turn to Tropical Storm Henri. It's a strong one, 70-mile-per-hour winds, 74-mile-per-hour winds. That's your Category 1 storm, so we're pretty close to that. Right now, it's located 490 miles southeast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. It's moving west at 10 miles per hour, and that's what we're going to watch over the next several hours, the next day, where it takes that northerly turn. Is it going to strengthen? Is it going to weaken? And that's going to be the difference of where this is going to land. So the National Hurricane Center does have it forming as a Category 1 storm sometime tonight into the early part of tomorrow. And then as we go throughout time here, this is the real concern. We're going to see where it's going to go north, if it goes west, if it goes east. But right now, the National Hurricane Center has it going over Nantucket, Cape Cod, or at least that's what we're going to be looking for the concern. Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, the eastern parts of Massachusetts, early Monday morning. We still have a few days. It does still need to strengthen weekend. It still needs to sort of get itself together. But regardless, this weekend, we could see some very high surf along the ocean beaches, possible coastal flooding, and then possible beach erosion, and then some rip current risk. And as we look through the computer models, when you look at this graphic, it looks confusing. There's a lot of lines there. But a lot of these computer agreements coming into agreement that we do think there could be at least a brush with the eastern parts of Massachusetts. So, Allison, we have a few days. We're going to watch this very, very closely. But, of course, we will keep you updated.
I know you will. Michelle, thank you so much. A lot of weather to be keeping an eye on lately. Thank you for the update.
Sure.
It is time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. And it's Thursday, so I even need to tell you what the headline is today. Weekly jobless claims out this morning, and they hit a new pandemic low. 348,000 people filing for first-time unemployment benefits last week. That's a good sign for our economic recovery. We're seeing slow but steady improvement in the jobs market as we head into the fall. But there's still a pretty big gap. We've got 6 million fewer people employed now than pre-pandemic. Another sign of the pandemic times, Amazon expanding. The Wall Street Journal reporting the online shopping behemoth wants to get into big brick and mortar with plans to open several department store style retail locations. The Journal saying the first stores would open in Ohio and California and be about a third of the size of a typical department store. They'd sell clothes, home goods, and electronics. Amazon opened its first physical store 6 years ago, a bookstore in Seattle. The pandemic bringing more power to the working people, but how much power do employees actually have? And how can you make yourself more marketable if you're in a dead-end job or you're looking to make a change? NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin takes a look.
Worker pandemic power is here to stay. The battered American worker is finally getting more power thanks to the pandemic. But for how long? American worker power has been on a steady decline since the 1950s as corporations grew more powerful and private sector unions fell. But the labor market is tight right now, with the most job openings ever in history, 10.1 million recorded at the end of June by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Businesses have to compete harder for workers, with the unemployment level to job openings ratio falling to 0.94. That means there are more job openings than people unemployed right now. Rare over the last 20 years. This ratio is a sign of higher worker power. That means those who are willing and able to work can demand everything from higher wages, better benefits, to more flexibility for their family and health, and they're getting it.
Worker power and employer power can be seen as two sides of the same coin. You know, if one increases, to some extent, it's a zero-sum game.
Ariana Garcia, 27, is a single mom in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She had been working in the high-pressure world of retail and beauty when she found herself on unemployment and not knowing each month how she would make rent.
I didn't feel like going back to retail was necessarily the safest idea or like the most stable in terms of, you know, really me needing stability.
Unemployed workers in declining fields or at greater risk of further COVID shutdown should focus on in-demand skills to increase their marketability and worker power, recruiters say. The top skills employees need to future-proof their hireability are in data literacy, understanding digital systems, adaptability, empathy, and collaboration, according to research by the McKinsey consulting firm. Ariana says she's great with people, overcoming challenges, and knows her way around a computer and social media.
So I was like, I started to get creative. Like, once again, how can you take these skills and where else might they fit?
She applied and got a school administrative assistant's job, and she invested over $2,500 in finishing her real estate license and the startup costs, signing on with a local brokerage. She still does some freelance beauty work on the side. Her salary's lower and the brokerage is commission-based, but overall the work is steady, offers great benefits, and the work-life balance is hugely beneficial for her and her family.
I think the biggest shift, as silly as it sounds, being able to be like, I don't feel well and I can't come to work.
Ariana thinks the new worker power is here to stay.
I'm cool with going and working for a 9 to 5, but does this 9 to 5 also work for me? Like, is it good for my mental? Does it pay me adequately? Do I have benefits to provide for my family? If it's a workplace that's not willing to provide that, we're either not going to work there or we're going to somehow go down a path of entrepreneurship.
But economists are skeptical. Dr. Anna Stansbury separates worker power into 4 buckets: labor market tightness, formal institutions that give workers power like unions, government policies to protect workers, and workplace norms of fairness. Of those 4 buckets, really only labor market tightness has fundamentally changed during the pandemic.
The way I look at it is we have a kind of very short-term tight labour market layered on top of still actually not a very tight labour market in a more systemic sense once the economy recovers from the pandemic. And if that does happen, then I'm optimistic that this shift could be longer term. But without that, I worry that this is a temporary blip.
But with the so-called hot vax summer turning into a foggy Delta fall and a labor shortage and worker power that comes with it may linger a little longer yet.
As parents go back to work, they are quickly realizing childcare is getting a lot more expensive. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule explains why.
For working mom Portia Twitt, daycare is essential, but she can't afford full-time care.
My childcare costs more than my mortgage.
Tuition for her 2-year-old's care up 30%.
I am trying to find if I can do a combination of daycare at a different location, hiring in-person care, and starting my day much earlier to watch her. It's actually horrific.
For the 27 million Americans who need childcare in order to work, it's a hefty expense. For young children, averaging $250 per week or $13,000 a year. That cost could rise as 4 out of every 5 childcare centers say they don't have enough staff, and some are paying more to hire workers.
The biggest challenge right now is finding and retaining high-quality staff.
During the pandemic, more than 1/3 of workers lost their jobs, and some never returned to childcare centers that pay around $12 an hour.
This was always a challenge for the childcare industry. Childcare providers are really notoriously undervalued and underpaid, but things have gotten worse as, these childcare facilities are now having to compete with higher wages offered by a lot of large multinational corporations who are also facing worker shortages.
Rose Cushing oversees 11 childcare centers in New Jersey.
We had to close a number of our programs and we had to close a number of our rooms.
How come?
Because we don't have enough staff at this time. We're down about 50 staff in early childhood education, and we are down to probably 40 to 50 staff in school-age child care as well.
Wow. To find workers, she's increased starting pay by $2 an hour. Until she has more staff, her waiting list of nearly 40 families will likely grow.
Child care, unlike other industries, is a ratio. So for every 3 children, I need a staff person. For every 7 children, we need a staff person. The only way for us to adapt is either shut our door or not service the family. If you're down a waiter in a restaurant or if you're down a clerk at your local convenience store, the line would be longer, the service would be slower. That's not an option in child care.
Finish this sentence for me. If I had more staff, blank.
I could serve so many more kids and help so many more families return to work.
The federal government has provided over $53 billion in COVID relief for childcare and early education. And President Biden wants $450 billion as part of his Build Back Better agenda. It includes capping childcare costs for families, investing in childcare centers, and raising the minimum wage for workers to $15 an hour.
If we don't find relief somehow, whether it's governmental or business, it will have long-term effects on our business and how families are able to continue working and continue improving their communities.
Because you've got so much to focus on with regard to securing your child care, are you able to do your best at work?
You know, Stephanie, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think so, because you see your little one and you want to be with your little one. You see your inbox start to get full. You want to lean into work, and you just get that stereotypical mom guilt of where you're like, I'm not being the best employee. I'm not being the best mom. And it hurts your heart.
A growing problem with no easy solution.
The beds are full in Mississippi's only children's hospital, with more pediatric COVID patients than they've seen since the start of the pandemic. And these kids are more seriously ill. A doctor there telling NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber it's only getting worse.
We're all quite concerned and worried about what's going on here in Mississippi. We have a hypertransmissible strain on the background of a largely under-vaccinated population. We're having meetings every day now, emergency meetings, with regard to the increasing numbers that we're seeing of pediatric COVID patients. We have 19 children in the hospital right now. 6 are in the intensive care unit, 5 are on the ventilators. So now we're seeing kids who are more fulminantly ill more frequently with severe acute COVID, even children who have not had previous underlying illnesses. And of course, on top of that, we are just beginning to see an uptick in the post-COVID associated syndrome, multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, which is associated with significant morbidity and mortality.
I was getting him vaccinated. Next month, he'll be old enough. September the 22nd will be his birthday. His blood and his heart goes up and it goes down. It'll go up and it goes down. That's scary. When you seeing your child laying in their sleep and you don't know if he's gonna wake up out of his sleep or you don't know what's gonna happen. He taking shots in his stomach to prevent blood clots. He have to get them twice a day. He on steroids. He do breathing treatment. He got IV. They just started him on antibiotics. So it's a lot for an 11-year-old to go through. Lay in the bed and just wondering, is I'm gonna make it the next hour?
All of our beds here, we have 32 beds. All of them are either ICU, which you'll see next in this tent, or what we call step down, which is a high level oxygen delivery ward bed.
In the United States, the last time y'all did a field hospital like this for COVID was January?
Yeah, it was January in the winter, January in Los Angeles and in North Carolina.
Were you expecting to need something like this summer?
No.
Is it disappointing?
A little bit, but, you know, honestly, right now, Samaritan's Purse is doing this, and we're rushing a field hospital down to Haiti after the earthquake. So we exist to serve, really, you know. I mean, it might be disappointing that we have to do it again and again when it's avoidable, but people in need, and that's where we go, you know. What we're trying to do is keep them out of the ICU, trying to provide as much oxygen as we can to treat them before they have to be intubated, and that's what will happen in every one of these beds.
If vaccines are working, why do Americans need booster shots? Today, co-host Savannah Guthrie asking CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky that very question and more. Here's part of that interview.
We have seen now evidence that we've been looking at just over the last week or so that has demonstrated that the vaccine is starting to wane in its effectiveness against infection. It's still holding up relatively well against severe disease and hospitalization, but we've also seen that we actually need more protection against the Delta virus, and we're starting to see in other countries that they're starting to see waning infection against more severe outcomes. So we're anticipating that that may come, and we're planning for it so we can be ahead of this virus.
Yeah, what I think you just said is there was concern that over time that the protection would wane against severe illness and death even, that essentially in some ways the 2 doses wouldn't be good enough anymore.
That's exactly right. So we're starting to see waning in infection. We think that that may result soon in waning in severe disease and outcome. We certainly don't want to see that here. And so that's why we're planning now to get ahead of it before that happens.
So here's my question. Is there hope, or better yet, data, that getting this third booster shot could actually prevent transmission?
So there's actually hope. We don't have data yet. We do know that the higher levels of protection, certainly in the Alpha variant, resulted in less transmission. And we have not yet seen the data, but we are hopeful that the booster will not only protect you, give you a higher level of protection, not just against the Delta variant, but against a broad range of variants, but it might also decrease the level of virus that you have and make it less transmissible if you happen to be a breakthrough.
If the protection after the first two shots fades, then presumably the third shot's protection fades too. It's the exact same shot. So do you anticipate this being regular boosters?
You know, I don't think we know that right now. What I will say is there's numerous vaccines where we have 2 primes of a series and then a later booster, and we don't need a boost after that. The hepatitis B vaccine would be one example. So I think we still obviously need to continue to follow the science. We need to see what happens with further variants and whether we have further variants here. But right now we're taking this one step at a time. We know we need a boost now, and we will continue to follow the science. But I don't think it's a given that we will be doing this, you know, continuously.
As you know, half of the U.S. is not vaccinated at all. Are you worried that this complicates your efforts to send a message to them that the vaccines work? Because now you're telling people, well, actually, you need a third. Does that undermine the messaging?
First, I want to say it is critically important. While we are talking about boosters to the nearly 170 million Americans who are fully vaccinated, we are still actively speaking with the 100 million Americans who are not yet vaccinated and asking them to get the information that they need to get fully vaccinated. They remain at risk of severe disease, illness, and death. When you are vaccinated with your first 2 doses of vaccine, you remain protected from severe disease and death for up to 6, 8, perhaps longer months. And so what this booster is going to do is to optimize that protection, to extend that protection longer.
Nearly half of transgender people have been mistreated by their medical providers. That's according to a new report from the Center for American Progress. One of the report's authors saying the onus of addressing discrimination against transgender people should fall on medical institutions. NBC Out associate editor Joe Yerkeba joins me now. Joe, that's just horrible to hear. And the numbers are even worse for transgender people of color. 68% of them say they have experienced mistreatment at the hands of a medical provider. We're talking about everything from refusal of care to even verbal and physical abuse. I know you spoke with a transgender non-binary person who went through this. What did they tell you?
Yeah, Jesse Brace told me that staff in an emergency room near their home in Lawrence, Kansas, refused to acknowledge their chosen name and their pronouns and didn't treat them for what they actually went in for. And as a result, it made them fearful of getting care for their seizures, and it's a fear that they still carry today.
So this isn't an isolated thing, right? I mean, we are seeing this have ripple effects. People are treated this way, and then perhaps they don't want to go back to the doctor. Let's talk about the ripple effects that this can have on the overall health of transgender people.
Yeah. Well, you can take a look at these stats on how discrimination can then prevent trans people from seeking future care. Like you mentioned, the survey found 28% of transgender people, including 22% of transgender people of color, reported having postponed or not gotten necessary medical care for fear of discrimination. And, you know, due to the discrimination they faced, Jesse Brace actually said that they delayed care for their seizures and as a result lost their job and were homeless for 3 years.
Oh. I mean, it's a horrible domino effect. Listen, the pandemic hasn't made anything better, right? I know the pandemic is only complicating this issue in particular. How is it affecting transgender people? What has it done here?
Yeah, it's really aggravated health disparities. 1 in 3 trans people reported having had suicidal thoughts during the pandemic, and 1 in 2 reported that their access to gender-affirming healthcare was curtailed significantly during the pandemic. So it's really had a significant impact.
Joe, another factor, the doctors themselves here. This report says even when transgender people don't experience discrimination, they're very likely to see providers who just don't have the cultural competency to provide them with affirming care. What does the Center for American Progress say that we can do to fix that problem?
Yeah, the center suggests that hospitals and medical institutions invest more in trans-inclusive cultural competency training, which I'll actually be covering in the coming weeks. It also suggests that federal and state governments increase funding for community and independent LGBTQ health clinics. I actually mentioned 2 in the article: Trans Health Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a trans-led independent health clinic, and the Knights and Orchids Society in Alabama. And these groups are really helping fill the gaps for trans people who want to get affirming care.
Well, Joe, I look forward to your reporting there, and also to the day when we can sit down and have a positive conversation on some of the progress we have made here. I know we really got a long way to go. Thank you for your reporting.
Thank you, Allison.
It's not just school teachers. School bus drivers are in short supply, too, these days, and that means kids are crowding in for longer rides than usual. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders looks at this latest bump in the back-to-school road.
Allison, used to be it was easy to get somebody to sit where I am in a driver's seat on a bus. But even with $5,000 signing bonuses, some school districts are finding it very difficult to lure drivers. That means that there right now are fewer drivers, fewer buses on routes, meaning kids have to pack into buses, and all of this happening at a time when social distancing is more important than ever.
With the start of the school year underway in many areas, the wheels on the bus are going round and round again. But in many school districts, those familiar yellow buses are carrying more kids, traveling further and taking longer rides than ever.
We would have to combine bus runs. So you can imagine that a child might be on a bus run that was supposed to be 30 minutes, might now be 50 minutes.
A national shortage of qualified drivers forcing some schools to scramble, in some cases hitting the relief valve, asking parents to carpool.
Asking parents to be the solution to this problem really isn't the solution.
Some school districts are now offering lucrative bonuses to lure in drivers, but even that's not doing the trick.
We're looking to fill 100 driver positions right now.
And at your last job fair, how many people showed up?
We had 16 show up at our last job. 16.
In some cases, school bus drivers who tend to be older say they're shying away from the job because they're worried being close to kids will expose them to COVID, especially if students are not required to wear masks.
They end up being hospitalized because they done caught the COVID from one of the students.
Even at $19 an hour with set hours and no weekends, district administrators say drivers remain scarce.
They set up an interview, no one comes back. No one, I always say they ghost us pretty much.
Bus companies are now actively recruiting new drivers.
You have the opportunity to earn a $1,500 sign-on bonus if you want to become a bus driver.
But the process to become a certified driver can take months, leaving kids heading back to school with COVID protocols with yet another bump in the road.
Last year here in Orange County, because of COVID protocols, they limited no more than 24 kids on a bus. But this year, because of the driver shortage, there are now as many as 77 kids on a bus. You don't have to be a good student to do that math.